Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Stephanie Bree, and it's time for another edition of the video game buyer's guide, collector's guide. This one's not going to be too packed full of information because we're talking the Sega 32X. The 32X is sort of a mid-step video game console, 32-bit console between the Genesis and the Saturn. Or at least that's what people believe it is, but that's not what it is at all. It's really just an accessory for the Sega Genesis that allows the Genesis to play some 32-bit games. It is the exact same as Sega using the 32 as Nintendo using the SuperFX chip in some of their games to enhance that system's capabilities. Instead of putting the chip in the cartridges like Nintendo did, Sega put the chip in a cartridge pass-through add-on that extended the capabilities of the Genesis to have 3D and 32-bit capabilities. But it's the exact same approach. So you shouldn't consider the 32X, the 37 software titles released for the 32X as the 37 titles for a failed video game console. You should consider them the 37 titles that utilize the 32X chip. But instead of the chip being in the cartridge, it was in the add-on. It's no different than the handful of 15 or so titles on the SNES that use the SuperFX chip. Because the 32X was never intended to be a standalone console, Sega had considered and developed prototypes of a combined unit that would feature 32X and Genesis capabilities in one without the need for the add-on, called Mars or Neptune, one or the other. I think 32X was Mars and they had one called Neptune. Their naming conventions are confusing, I apologize. Needless to say, this was not intended to be a whole new console. Just like the combined XI or CDX that were machines that had Genesis and Sega CD combined into one machine without the need for an add-on. It was basically the same concept. So you shouldn't go into the 32X thinking of it as its own software library. For starters, you have to already have a Sega Genesis to be able to use the 32X in the first place. So you really need to consider it an extension of the Genesis. To that end, I've already done a video on my top 25 best 32X games. You should go ahead and check out that video if you want to know which ones to buy. But honestly, there's not really any game on the 32X I wouldn't recommend buying. I've owned them all or played them all at different points in my life, and they're all worth it. Some are better than others, but they're all pretty good games. I just don't consider the 32X software library separate from the Genesis library, just like I don't consider the Star Fox or Doom or any other, Super Mario RPG or any other game that utilized the SuperFX chip on the Super Nintendo as a separate library from the SNES. I know technically the 32X games are not playable on a base Genesis unit, but it's no different than having to have the multi-tap or the Justifier gun or some other accessory to play your game. It's no different than that. Unfortunately, because 32X emulation is difficult, and because the system didn't sell well, and the software isn't really in high demand, there aren't any notable or viable modern options for playing 32X software outside of an original 32X unit, which is only compatible with some of the original Genesis hardware, so you have to be very careful which machine you buy and you try to hook it up to. On top of that, there's only one emulator that I know of that can handle 32X software well, and And as far as I know, it's only available on Windows, but again, don't quote me on this. So you don't have a lot of options, and 32X software has never, to the best of my knowledge, been reissued on modern systems like Steam, GOG, PlayStation, or Xbox Live, or not even Virtual Console on the Switch or the Wii or anything else. But fortunately, even though the games didn't sell tremendously well, they sold well enough for what they were. And they're not in incredibly high demand, so they're not outrageously overpriced. They're pretty easy to get. Mini, get out of there. And they're not too terribly expensive. So if you want to get a 32X, just make sure you have the right Genesis. I believe the Model 1 and the Model 2 are the only ones that are officially supported. I know it will not work on a CDX or a Model 3 or a Nomad. I don't know about the XI. But that's really all I can say about the 32X, other than it's pretty awesome. Stay cool.